Good evening. Tonight we'll talk about communication principles for virtual teams. As way of recap, let's recall that in situations where knowledge is distributed, and we have argued that that is more common in the modern era and is a reason for virtual teams, then in those situations where knowledge is distributed, various members of a virtual team will have different pieces of the puzzle. Communication becomes critical to connect the puzzle pieces together. The world today requires adaptability because of the historic competitive pressures and the need to innovate to improve performance or differentiate your product or service from others. Moreover, knowledge is becoming a larger percentage of the final cost of a good or service. This means that high volume is an advantage because it amortizes that knowledge cost. The knowledge that goes into the output is independent of how many units of output are created, so the more units, the lower the allocated knowledge cost. So in addition, organizations benefit from global operations to increase their sales and reduce the burden of knowledge costs. This in turn requires knowledge of foreign markets, and again, the distributed knowledge problem arises. Communication is the basis for collaboration and information or knowledge sharing. Communication on virtual teams is fundamental for the following reasons. Distance, time, and culture work to undermine cohesion, coordination, and control of a team. Communications is the force that can restore these critical team attributes. In addition to distance and time, there is also a transition of hierarchical structures into collaborative networks. Effective business communication has always been a critical business operation, but is even more so today. Furthermore, the old adage is even more true today. To be successful, your message must be understood and accepted. Messages throughout the organization are no longer paper reports or memorandum, but now include email, discussion forums, and video conferencing. Cohesion is the trusted interaction between team members based on trust. Distance, time, and culture make it more difficult to establish trust and more difficult for team members to bind with each other. This is a primary reason team initiation meetings are usually face-to-face. However, good communication practices can also help. Awareness is an important element in cohesion. You are aware of whom to contact for an ad hoc solution, a request for clarification, small improvements, or numerous other small adjustments that need to be made. In a co-located team with a long history together, this information is widely known. But on newly formed teams of strangers, separated by distance and time, this informational knowledge must be made explicit, often in the form of a member information directory. Coordination is the collection of small adjustments made to keep on goal and incorporate new situational awareness. Coordination is done through communication. A quick question, a remark, a hallway conversation, a request for clarification that results in a new understanding. In other words, coordination has traditionally been done through spontaneous communications. Spontaneous conversation is not easy on global virtual teams. With distributed collaboration, these coordinations slow down because spontaneous communication is hindered by distance, time, and culture. The extra work and the slowdowns in coordinating delay work progress. If the team proceeds along the wrong path for too long a time, it becomes difficult to get everyone back on track. So coordination is essential to keep the project on the right track, and it's more difficult with global virtual teams. Distance and time also have an impact on the management function of control. Control is keeping teams compliant with the mission set by board of directors or executive staff, and at the same time work consistently within the policies and standards of the organization. Control on co-located teams is aided by a manager roaming, looking over the shoulder to examine the work of team members, and quick dialogues. Managers on global virtual teams must explicitly request the information needed to validate control is maintained in the work. Management by walking around is the traditional form of control. Successful control in management by walking around occurs when managers are co-located with employees and managers can see, observe, and dialogue with their staff. Again, this is not the case for virtual teams. For virtual teams, managers must formally collect the information and direct staff to follow policy by more formal, predefined methods that rely on technology. However, we communicate best when we're close together. Just as time and distance undermine coordination for other activities, they undermine coordination for communication, which must be scheduled, a technology selected, the message tailored for the type of channel and media, and communications is more exaggerated or involved with virtual teams because of the time and distance separations. 80% of a message is conveyed non-verbally, and this is a challenge for global virtual teams. With dispersed locations, misunderstandings take more time to resolve because times for discussion must be scheduled. Frustration with these misunderstandings and delays and rework they cause can lead to conflict. Communication is complete when it's sent, received, understood, and acted on. Communication starts with a source or sender, the initiator of the message, deciding that something needs to be communicated. This can be from unanticipated events that other team members must know about or scheduled communications according to a plan. The process of creating a message to convey an intended meaning and elicit a certain type of response is known as encoding. Communication media is the means of delivering a message to its audience. They can be letters, emails, documents, phone calls, teleconference, web conference, among others. Receivers are any persons who are exposed to the message. Decoding is the process of interpreting a message to understand what it means. Feedback is a response from the receiver to the source about the message. Global virtual teams must explicitly specify much of the communications that remain spontaneous and implicit with co-located teams. This creates an added administrative burden for virtual teams, but it's unavoidable. Some of the necessary communication actions are periodic meetings in real time. Everyone's connected together electronically at the same time. Define smaller and more frequent deliverables to address coordination problems. You address it this way by making even smaller changes and more frequently communicating them so that misunderstandings and delays can be addressed on a smaller issue and on a more timely basis. and then standardize on communication protocols. It's important to organize the communications for a virtual team. This necessary formality means that an overwhelming amount of work organizing communication can be generated for a virtual team. Let's look at a case study to help put the communications issue in context. The open source community uses global virtual teams exclusively in their work to produce software that competes with the output of giant software firms such as Oracle and Microsoft. The entire life cycle of each open source product is a global virtual endeavor. Examples are Linux, Ruby on Rails, MongoDB, and of course many others. These product development and maintenance activities are organized around globally persistent virtual management tools, such as websites, content repositories, forums, threaded emails, and source code directories. An example of such a virtual management tool set is GitHub. And we're going to go through a demo of GitHub first, and then we'll go in to explain how open source uses these various virtual management tools such as websites, content repositories, forums, threaded emails, and source code directories. So let's bring up GitHub. Okay, and I'll just go to the root directory first of GitHub. And we'll look at Rails, Ruby on Rails. It's a fairly popular item. It's an up-and-comer in the programming language world. Okay, and we'll select the Ruby on Rails website. So here you can see we've got a comprehensive communication forum for the global virtual team that's working on Ruby on Rails. Let's just start. We can have issues. People can report issues with Ruby on Rails. Here's an example of someone reporting an issue when you pass a single value or a value of arrays. And there's many other issues that are there, and then the team can work on these issues that are reported, prioritize them, and take action on those that are most pressing. There's also a commit log, so you can see people who are working on it and what they've done in the development effort, and of course when they did it. And they list each one of the actions. They give it a number and a description of exactly what they did. We have contributors to the project, and this is a worldwide group of people whose work is coordinated through this website, this collaboration site. And you can see the general activity in terms of commits over the past 10 years, and the spikes are probably when they're coming out with major releases of the product. And here's some of the folks that have been working on it recently. Now you also have branches, and this is where somebody will take out a section of the code, create a branch, and then start working on updates or changes, bug fixes. When they've satisfactorily tested it, they can then merge that back into the master branch, And at any given time, you'll have a variable number of branches that have been created, checked out, and are underway. You can download releases of it. So if you wanted Ruby on Rails, you could get version 4.1.9 here in a zip file or a Unix tape archive. And likewise all the way back, any particular version you're interested in, you can download it and install it on your local machine. Okay, and we also have something known as narratives that are here. So here's where we have some major functionality that's defined, and Action Mailer is one of the major functions that they're working on right now. So if we click on Action Mailer, we can get, okay, here's the library, the test cases. A lot of the work these days is done with test-driven development rather than doing the testing after you do your coding. You do your test, you develop your test scripts first. And here's the narrative. So this explains what Action Mailer is, and it gives an overview of it and how to use it. And this is a narrative. So we'll go into that in just a couple of minutes in more detail. Okay, so that kind of an introduction to open source websites. Let's go ahead and go through a more structured introduction to it all. So, open source communities, the open source developers organize around products into communities. So like these 2,500 various people around the world are in the Ruby on Rails community. People in the communities identify with the purpose of that community and the development of a particular software product. These developers act to build trust and reputation, which means sharing time, expertise, and resources. And of course, these are valuable traits for a global virtual team. As we discussed last week in our leadership lecture, that's one of the reasons you want to go to an LMX partner level leadership style, because you do get that sharing. They make making substantial contributions is a key to advancement in the community. So the people who can create branches, do work, test, and then merge those branches back into the master branch, they aren't just anybody who comes along. They're people who have made substantial contributions along the way, and they've earned the trust of the community. Members regularly use discussion forums to communicate, to observe, to contribute to current interest in the community. And we looked at several of those in the GitHub for Ruby on Rails. Members also communicate by writing technical reports that are examined and reviewed by other members. Rather than use traditional software engineering processes with its prescribed documentation, open source software uses a variety of other methods. Requirements can be posted or even implied in emails or forum threads for open review and refinement. They become important to a community because somebody posited them and the community agreed that they had value. All of these members in the community are assumed to have a deep domain knowledge about the product in focus, for example, Ruby on Rails, and so there is a shared awareness of obvious features. Some members develop such obvious awareness features and submit the finished work without even implicit requests for them. So if we were looking at Action Mailer, it could be that that was something that was requested and posited in emails or forum threads, or it could be that guy just felt, hey, this is an obvious feature for Ruby on Rails or any other framework, any other code development framework, and we need to have something like Action Mailer. You really need, for modern workflow work or knowledge management, the inability to integrate in with the messaging system of the organization. So an action mailer is something that makes perfect sense. So that person may have just went ahead and did it as an implicit request without even someone explicitly requesting it. The submission and community acceptance of such shared awareness work serves as a post hoc documentation that a feature was added and when. So you'll go through the log that we were looking at, and you can see when people added various functionality, like Action Mailer. Member empowerment is given to those in the community with status, which is gained through assistance and sharing of knowledge. Complex work processes are not followed by the open source communities. For example, often a non-functional vision statement will replace complex system definitions that were or usually are done in UML diagrams by more traditional development efforts. Vision statements are easier to communicate, and they more easily obtain understanding. Community members become as important or more important than knowledge elicited from stakeholders, customers, or prospective end users of the open software systems, because they have such deep domain knowledge and they have knowledge of the application of these systems. They're going to have a perspective that is valued even more than the customers of Ruby on Rails. And I will say this, in my organization we did a thorough evaluation of Ruby on Rails. We use Visual Studio now, and we really liked it, but there was such tremendous change between the major versions that you did not really have backward compatibility. You had to run backward compatible engines. So there was some concern on our part as users and users of the software that if we made a big investment in one version, we may have to make a big reinvestment when we went to the next version, because the old code would stop working in the new version. So there's advantages and disadvantages to valuing the member, the guru viewpoint more than the end user viewpoint. Nevertheless, let's go on through the open communication on the community digital space using tools such as forums or emails or threaded discussions. Product features come into being. The salient criteria seems to be the member status in a community with often deep knowledge of the product. Members read the community communications, make sense of them based on their understanding and perspective, and they are free to add into the conversation. These community email and forum communication messages often give rise to another type of communication, narratives. Narrative descriptions concisely specify and concentrate the discourse about a feature. These narratives are passively referenced or contain hyperlinks to supporting knowledge or depend on common knowledge among the members. Community members are assumed to have mastery over the core knowledge related to the product and to bring additional knowledge and new perspectives. So when we looked at the Action Mailer functionality, we did look at the narrative. And again, that's something that's very informally done, but it's supposed to cover all the aspects, what the particular functionality is, how would you employ it in your application, how would users take advantage of it. So it's a narrative that basically condenses all the topics in the forums and emails that had gone into the development of the Action Mailer. So the open source communities communicate through email or forum discussion threads, system vision statements, feature narratives, requests to deliver certain features, reference to other knowledge sources related to the issues being discussed, and they have a reliance on the deep domain knowledge of participants that permits more abbreviated communications. A salient attribute for open source software development is there are little or no time or financial pressures on these communities. Okay, let's play this. Oops. Here's a YouTube video on Drupal, which, of course, like
Open
Ruby on
source
Rails,
is software that people from around the world contribute to, often as part of their day job, because if the open source software is useful enough, they're using it for their work, it's worth it to them to contribute to the project to make it better, because then they get to use better software, and they benefit from all the people all over the world that are doing it.
I think there's a couple of different reasons why Drupal became so popular. I think one of the primary reasons is the community. We created a culture of collaboration, and a culture of collaboration translated in us building a large community of people very passionate about the product. What really makes Drupal what it is that community of people. That's where all the innovation comes from. That's where all the passion comes from.
You know, you talk to somebody like Time Inc., who's a Drupal user, and they'll start talking to you about social capability and you know, being able to build social networks within their properties and user-generated content and all these things. Those are things that the community moves incredibly fast to build and to adopt.
There's a lot of interaction between Acquia and the community. One of the key things is that we have gardening days. So every 3 weeks iteration, we have 2 days where the engineers are given their time to interact with the community the way they see fit for their own personal projects. Because all these people were plucked from the community as great contributors originally, and now they have to continue and enhance Drupal and add to those modules.
The great thing about Drupal, you can go on to one of the forums at Drupal.org. Acquia also has our own forums. It's been Drupal Gardens, one of our products. There's a lot of conversation that happens on those forums, and so people get to understand that they can go onto those forums and engage the community.
The Drupal community is really, really passionate and awesome and really caring for each other.
I really like to get out there and to meet the developers, the contributors.
Drupal's not a software product where you can just go read the book and walk away and be able to do everything. Drupal's constantly growing and evolving, so it's really important for people to understand that they need to engage with the community.
Drupal camps are 1 to 2 day events. They bring professionals and fans of Drupal together to foster knowledge.
I went to my first DrupalCon in 2007 in Sunnyvale, California. I was surrounded by a bunch of people who were hacking on the same software I was hacking on, and it's just been a great experience.
I think it's a sign of the Drupal project growing up and reaching a level of maturity that I think it needs to reach in order to get to the next level. Without the community, Drupal wouldn't be what it is today.
You know, Acquia really cares about Drupal getting bigger and better and more awesome, and that's exactly where I like to be.
Okay, so we took a look at open source communities as our case study in communications, and the reason we looked at them is they are global virtual teams. A team that develops Ruby on Rails, and I've never seen as much excitement generated for a software development platform as I have for Ruby on Rails. It's really incredible the intense interest that people have in this. And likewise Drupal. They're both global virtual teams who are using communications methods that virtual teams inside of businesses, inside of organizations need to take advantage of as well. And you saw, we did in our case study, we went and had a demo, looked at GitHub and how they're using various collaboration technologies to organize their work effort. It's not centrally directed, this is decentralized. They're taking advantage of distributed knowledge, and the work is still coordinated nonetheless. So let's take a 5-minute break and then come back. We'll continue on with the communication principles and how we might apply them to a global virtual team.